Stop?
Yeah. Okay. Let me go.
Good morning, everyone. This is the round meeting.
So let me see. I have to meet Echo. And then, okay. Mm. Meet Echo. Mm. I just join Meet Echo and we start.
Do you want me to get started
Yeah.
with the notary?
Yes, observer.
Okay.
Me.
Good morning. This is the round meeting. We will start now. Okay. We have our first meeting yesterday. This is the not well. Please be aware that this meeting is aligned with that. We will not read it, but it applies to all IETF activities. These are the meeting materials. Check it that Etherpad is the same than yesterday. We put the Monday. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Michael is going to be the JavaScript and minus taker, please. Okay, thank you very much, Alex and Dominique. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah, the slides are a complete set. This is the second part. Please sign the blue sheets. The blue sheets are there. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Pascal. Good teamwork here. This is the agenda for today. So we will start with this introduction. Then we go for Pascal with an hour leave. Then we will give some update and use of Ripple info. Then Pascal or Dominique, they're going to talk about the enlightened information to keep the same status between the child and the father. Then Raul is going to provide his update for MPDAO. And then Pascal is going to talk about the turn off 8138. We aim to do this working group adoption today. I started, and we're going to confirm by mailing list. So then we have the open floor. Comments for the agenda? Okay, we go forward. Thank you. Pascal, thank you. This draft is almost ready for last call. We are asking for reviews. Yes.
Hello, I'm Pascal Thubert from Cisco. So this is about the REPL unaware leaf. So there was a lot of activity on this document, and the reason is that we actually found that it was a normative reference to other documents which were well advanced. And so now the REPL unaware leaf is kind of holding other documents in misref state. And we want to avoid keeping those documents in misref too long. So we ended up speeding some work on unaware leaf. It is not a very complex document. It is the application of RFC 8505, which is agnostic to the routing protocol, but still is a registration mechanism by a host to a router. And in this case, we explain how you can use RFC 8505 to register to REPL services. There are other documents, the IETF, for instance, in Rift, for ND proxy, etc., that also leverage RFC 8505 as a registration mechanism. So this particular document is how a leaf will use 8505 to register to REPL services. So the draft has moved along quite a bit. I mean, there were like 4 revisions since the last IETF. And part of that is related to the review by Alvaro. So thank you so much, Alvaro, for all your help there. On the DCO document, because basically there is this concept that the DCO is the only message in REPL that goes down asynchronously from the root to the devices. And there are a number of flows, including the backbone router, which require possibly a message that goes through the REPL network asynchronously down to the 6LR. So the router can actually tell the leaf that there is a prime, whatever. And so we found that it was actually useful, and we did it to carry an ND status into the REPL status. And the way we initially did that was not satisfactory. It was kind of a mapping table. And now we replaced that by an explicit signaling inside the REPL status, so that if you carry an ND status in the REPL status, then there's this flag telling you, right? So initially, the REPL status, the leftmost bit, was an error versus warning bit. If the status was above 128, then it was an error. Below, it was a warning. Now we have the second bit, which signals whether you actually have a native REPL status or if you are transporting an ND status. We are doing all this game because actually ND and REPL is kind of an extension to ND for multi-hop. You can see it as that. And that's how we're using it in many use cases. It's just ND for NBMA networks. And at the edge of the REPL network, what you see is with the rule draft is pure ND. And that's true also at the northern edge. If you have a backbone with the backbone router, it's pure ND. So at some point, there is this need to map the way REPL expresses things and the way ND expresses things. And you'll find the same kind of prime, not prime, but things. With the PIO, for instance, the prefix information option in REPL is the ND one. So you see there is a tight integration between ND and REPL. In the case of unaware leaf, the most important integration is that before this draft, you had to have 2 different messages that flow in parallel between the router down in the network and the root. One of them was for ND, that's the DAR-DAC exchange, and the other one was the DAO for REPL. And that were 2 messages in a constrained network, multi-hop, sometimes very deep. So we said, hey, with the real draft, we'll kind of package them into one, which means that at some point you have to re-explode that. And so integrating the status as we did is part of that game. We use REPL down the DAG to signal to a 6LR. The 6LR picks the information it needs, sends it to the leaf. So that's one big thing we did, this status game. The other big thing we did was clean up the the way we integrate with address protection. So in ND, you've got this concept of, with 8505 and APND, you've got this concept of a rover. The rover is a capability by the host to actually prove that he owns the address. Right now, we are not using that in REPL to protect REPL. I hope in the future we will be able to do that. But for now, we are not using it to protect REPL, but the rover was needed on the north of the DODAG to actually signal to the 6 LBR in case the 6 LBR is separated from the root. We had this long discussion, do we want to force that the 6 LBR is the same box as the root or not? At some time we said yes, and then we decided no, all right? So since it's a no, and we need the rover to talk to the 6 LBR because the 6 LBR wants it, then we had to pass the rover as part of the target. So it's actually the signature kind of, or the way to prove the ownership of the target is now piggybacked into REPL. So that's another big change that we made in the rule draft. So as of today, it's just to enable us to build the correct exchange with the 6 LBR. So the root can do a DARDAC with the 6 LBR, as opposed to the 6 LR down there. So we save all these things. But in the future, that also gives us the opportunity to actually validate a REPL route, because now we'll be able, since we have the rover as part of the REPL signaling, we'll be able to use that to prove the ownership of the address if we care to. Because right now, anybody can inject a DAO and say this address is here. But in the future, with this rover, we can exchange APND, and we'll see if we do that or not, but we'll be able to prove the ownership. So it's kind of a good idea. We needed it, but it's also a good idea to protect the future. Last but not least, we pulled kind of DCO from the editor queue because of the changes which are related to what I just said, the status and stuff. We also pulled the use of REPL info from the editor queue. And that was more like a problem of definition. What is a rule in particular? There was a discrepancy between how the use of REPL info defined a rule, REPL unaware leaf, and how this draft defined a REPL unaware leaf. So we had all those discussions on the mailing list, and we ended up with a common definition. And I believe now that use of REPL info is clean and self-consistent, and the rule draft now is aligned to that. And so the way we've done it now is that the rule draft has a normative reference to the use of REPL and not the other way around. So we can ship use of REPL if we care to. So the way we define those things, the end of that long story, to make it very short, is that a leaf, first we had to define a leaf. You realize that the leaf was not redefined since the days of early REPL. So now with the unaware thing, the leaf definition had to be updated. So a leaf now is a IPv6 host, so it has to comply with 8200. So it's an IPv6 host, which is attached to a REPL network, right? It's a host, supports IPv6, attached to a REPL network, getting routing through REPL. And with that simple definition, you'll find that the way the way use of REPL info described forwarding to the leaf is completely consistent, because it doesn't care how the route was set up, right? The rule draft will be one way of setting that route. You could imagine that there are other ways for other sorts of leaf. So a leaf is a plain IPv6 host. The only thing you want from him is that it supports a hop-by-hop header that's fully consumed, and that's part of 8200. And the other thing you want from him is that if there is this hop-by-hop header, he can ignore it, which is also compliance to 8200. So it's an IPv6 host. With that, we can use the use of REPL info the way it was described for a long time. So we didn't have to change that piece. Okay, so that's a leaf. A leaf is an IPv6 host attached to a REPL network. I mean, that's kind of easy. Now, REPL aware will mean that he understands RFC 6550. And REPL unaware doesn't understand RFC 6550, simple as that. So now we have a very simple concept of what a REPL unaware leaf is. Is that enough to play with this draft? No, because this draft explains how a REPL unaware leaf will use 8505. It has to use 8505 in a certain manner. So this draft adds dependency on the host, describes how the host that supports 8505 will use 8505, so that the router in turn can provide REPL routing for it. So this is kind of, now initially, like 4 versions ago, it was presented as the definition of a rule. Now it's no more the definition of a rule. The rule is this leaf which is not aware of REPL, but then we've got this additional support that's needed on a rule to make it a rule that does this draft, basically. I hope it's clear. Oh. Okay. So that's where we are. As editor, I believe that the draft is ready. I would really appreciate that people see Ines' mail asking for reviews. Either we do 1 or 2 early reviews, and then we do the workgroup last call. And then if he would love to see hands, yes.
Thank you, Pascal. Yes, please, who is willing to review this draft? We need 2 reviews. Thank you, Raul. What else? One more. One more. Yes, Raul?
Rahul Jadhav, Huawei. So one of the questions that I have was with regards to the REPL status. Since now we have a lot of new semantic getting added to REPL status, which essentially is carrying the ND status back as well.
Huh?
So this will also mean that the DAO ACK status, I mean, it updates essentially 6550. So is it okay to use the same status, or shall we? I mean, I know that we have already discussed this before, and we decided to use the same status. But I just want to bring to this working group notice again that, you know, if it is indeed the right way of doing it, or shall we have a different reason or something which we should be using instead? Because now we are sort of confining and overlapping a lot of ND stuff with REPL in a way, you know.
Yes, I mean, yeah, we needed that for a number of drafts, including backbone router.
Right.
Now we have a very clean way of doing it, I would believe. What alternate would we have? Like define a second field for ND status separate from REPL status? I mean, it's 1 more byte, right? I mean, do we need more? So the new format leaves us 64 values for pure REPL status and 64 values for ND status that are carried along. And I mean, we're very, very far from needing all those statuses, right? So having yet another byte, which is 8 bits in the air, for something that we're very, very far from consuming.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Basically, what we're saying is there is still a lot of scope for expansion, regardless of.
I mean, for REPL, we did not even define a single error code so far, right? We just said if the bit on the left is on, it's an error, it's a rejection, and we expected that new specs would come in with examples of rejection. And so far, the only examples of rejection we have are the ones that are carried from ND, actually.
And in case of DAO ACK, we have rejection from the parent, upstream parent, in case of storing mode of operation for the table is full and things like that, where implementers are using their own statuses.
Yes, exactly. So that's why the bit that we used to signal ND is actually the second bit when it's on. So if people started using 1, 0, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever, we don't impact those specifications or those implementations. But really, if people want to start using status code in REPL, they should go to IANA. And now it's something we can look at actually as part of the review for the real draft, since we are actually telling IANA we are doing those things. Please consider the way you would like to see the new REPL status code assigned by IANA. You know, there is always this short sentence which says, oh, it has to be an RFC, it has to be a standard document. There is an RFC telling you how to word those things. Where do you expect that the REPL status will be coming from? Would you like some companies to propose directly a status to IANA and be granted, or, you know? So I mean, Alvaro, I see you're raising interest, but that's a big question to IANA. I mean, if you're telling me there are implementations which may be starting to use some code and they never declare them anywhere, it's very risky for them, because at some point the main spec may decide to use the statuses. That's why there is a INR. So what is the policy for allocating at INR? Do we open it so that some implementation can go to INR and say, oh, I want this code, yes, you get it? Or do we want to close it a little bit so it has to be a standard from any standard body? Or does it need to be an expert review or an RFC? Or so there are words, and I just picked one at the moment. So please consider this carefully as part of your review.
Okay. The other question that I had was with regards to the capabilities. Now that we have the 6LR essentially signaling on behalf of the unaware leaf, what does it mean? For example, if let's say the 6LR is capable of doing 8138, and the unaware leaf is clearly not, so it would mean that somehow the root should know that the 6LR is in charge of the unaware leaf and has to do IP and IP.
I would not say that way, because the compression is a sublayer. I mean, it's under layer 3, right? Which means that you could, in theory, decompress at every hop, if you like to. It's the way you place the packet on the wire. I mean, the compressed form is equivalent to the uncompressed form, meaning that the 6LR, if it doesn't know better, it should just uncompress. But the root doesn't have to care whether the 6LR makes the compression decision. It's a one-hop decision.
Okay. So the assumption here is that the 6LRs make the decision anyways for the data plane as well on behalf of
yes,
the
as
unaware
soon as
leaf.
you get out of the REPL domain for an external route, which is the case of rule, unless you know better, the 6LR should always decompress. But the root doesn't have to know about that. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay. I did not use the time, did I? Yes, I will pass the blue sheet.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Some more questions? No? Well, I will give you an update about the use of REPL info. Before, please sign the blue sheets. They are given. Thank you very much, Pascal, for deliver that. Okay. Like Pascal said, we add the terminology. We define what's a REPL leaf. So it's like an IPv6 host, but we can have, when the topology is formed, we can have a router as a leaf as well, right, Pascal? But actually we define a REPL leaf IPv6 host as functionality, but when we form the topology, a router, when join the topology, is going to be a leaf for some temporal time. But we aim here kind of functionality. So then we have the IPv6 host aligned with the 8200. Then we can have aware nodes, REPL aware nodes, leaf, and REPL unaware leaf. So basically, this is the terminology that we introduce. We hope for comments. If you are not agree, please let us know. Then other modifications. We add the sections to advertise external targets. In our case, rule is an external target through non-storing signaling. So in our case, 2 use cases are affected. Yes. Yes, Pascal?
Don't interrupt you when I come.
Yes.
But Pascal, you were here. This first sentence hides a change, which is quite important, is that all the discussion about using link local encapsulation at every hop is gone.
Yes, yes. We say in the document that we don't expect the rule to support IP encapsulation, and as well, we don't expect the rule to support 8138 compression. So the traffic is encapsulated in the root, if it's going to be destination to the rule. When it's encapsulated into the root, the destination is the 6LR, father of the rule. So therefore, 2 use cases are modified in our use cases. And as well, we update the RFC editor comments. Basically, are some needs. So those are the 3 big changes: the terminology, add this section about external targets, and then we update the story mode use cases where the rule is the destination. So this is the document. So please, if you don't agree, send us our comment, or otherwise we can proceed. We will send an email to the mailing list as well, kind of last call, so you can state if you don't agree. Question, comments? Okay, thank you. Yes, Pascal?
Pascal again. Yes, I have a question to Alvaro, because we did this unusual thing, which is to pull the document out of the RFC editor queue. So now we need to put it back. And
Yeah,
so
but-
what are the next steps and how is this going to happen?
Alvaro with routing ID. Yes, what's going to happen is you're going to review this on the mailing list. You're going to send it to me. I'm going to look at it. Most likely, looking at the changes that have been done, it will be fine because the working group has already reviewed it. I don't think we necessarily need to go back to IAG evaluation and IETF let's call and all this stuff. So I'll probably just tell the RFC editor that we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Probably, yes.
Thank you very much. Now we have Pascal with the Elite and Dio information to keep the same state between child and father. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. Yes, when we did REPL, we thought as usual on the immediate prime and not necessarily on how the protocol would live on. Meaning, the expectation was the network will have a single and simple configuration, and that's going to be it forever. And now the protocol becomes more successful, and you see all sorts of variation of how it's being deployed. And now you see that people are adding new features, and all those RFCs that we are writing now are kind of new features which are added to the protocol. And when we built the initial protocol, we didn't really care too much about how those additions would happen and how a live network could be updated. And so if we take the particular case of what we call the configuration option, this is an interesting thing. For instance, Anima likes REPL because it has this autonomic thing in it, which is that basically the CLI, the configuration of the routers is learned as part of the protocol itself. So you just have to configure, quote unquote, the root, and the root will distribute the configuration as part of the signaling which creates the routing in the first place. So the whole network is self-configured this way. Not really fully self. You need to configure the root, but then the whole network will learn the configuration from the REPL signaling itself, as opposed to what you find usually. You have to configure all the routers and say you run this protocol on that interface, and here are the parameters, and you need to be homogeneous in all the routers for this to work. REPL is not like that. REPL distributes its own CLI as part of the protocol itself, which is kind of cool for a network that scales to thousands of nodes, and the nodes are hardly reachable. But now we had a number of interim meetings, and as part of the discussion, in particular on the configuration and stuff, we found that the way REPL specified it, and in particular the capability to elide the configuration, when everybody understands the configuration, there's no point repeating. And so REPL says, hey, you can elide it after a while. But that really implies that everybody is aware of that configuration. And mostly it tells you that you don't expect the configuration to change after that. Well, that was cool for the early REPL, but now we want to be able to place modifications. And if we just send a DIO with a new configuration, and we know some nodes will miss it. So how long should we be repeating that configuration till we are sure that every node knows that the configuration was updated. It's kind of a problem. So we discussed that a number of times at the interim, and we ended up saying, hey, we want a simple but very explicit signaling that tells us what is the version of those fields that we want to elide. So the configuration is one, the capability could be one, the prefix information can be one. REPL says you can elide them, but it never says, hey, if you elide them, how do the nodes know that it's updated? So we talked, and we decided that we would have a draft, and then there was a raise hand who wants to write this draft. It ended up being me. So this draft is pretty much what we said at those interim calls and put into words. It's not complicated. It's all about using a sequence number for every option and being able to signal the sequence numbers. The only complexity is that the sequence number is in the main DIO because you elide the options. And so basically it's kind of one sequence number for all the options. If you don't like that approach, then we need to rewrite a number of things in this draft. But it's important. It's the only kind of weird thing in this draft is the number is the number of the DIO, all options considered. You change one option, you change this number. Meaning that you have to figure out when the number changes, which options are impacted. And when you're back level from that number, well, you need to dig which were the options that were changed. So in order to be able to do that smoothly, we introduced a new option, which is kind of just giving you option by option, the option number and the sequence at which it was last updated. So you can very rapidly see the sequence of each particular option, what's the last change. You know where you are, so you know which one has changed, you get those ones. So it's basically, if you're back level with this number, you send a this message to your parent, and the parent will come back to you with everything that changes since the sequence that you saw, giving you the abbreviated version for things which did not change, so you have the real number, and the unabbreviated version for those options which did change. So now you're resynchronized. So it's really a synchronization protocol based on a single sequence number for all options. Since this sequence number wraps, that has the consequence that you need to increase the sequence number of each option before the thing wraps. So it's not perfect. We might like to do it slightly differently. So it's just a proposal that's on the paper. If we want to have one sequence number per option, then we will have to signal the abbreviated version of all options in every packet, which is a lot more costly. So it's a choice. The choice right now in the draft was to put one single sequence number for all options, so you don't have to put even the abbreviated versions. That saves you a lot of bytes. I mean, like 4 bytes per option. And if we want to use this mechanism for more and more stuff, we talked about having the SLLA option. We talked about having, I don't remember a number of options from ND into the DIO, and we want to abbreviate them all. Well, having the list of all the abbreviation with the sequence number will start to be big already. So I kind of like the idea that we have a single sequence for everybody. So we don't put all those things. But to be discussed, right? I think that's the most discussable item. Apart from that, it's a very simple spec. I mean, straight to the point, I hope. I mean, very simple problem to solve, very simple solution, apart from this common sequence number thing. So please review, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the problem is still fresh in the mind of those who participated to the entrance. So please, you asked me to write it, review it. Let's move forward, because that's something we can forget as soon as we've done it. So, yeah. I can go through the slides now. That was a big introduction.
I'll just wait for you to finish this. Yeah.
Okay. So what didn't I say? Well, the sequence number is called the REPL configuration state sequence. Now the DIO tells you this RCSS, which is global to all the options. So now you can fully elide any notion of any of those options and just say the global sequence number for all of them. We also, there was a question on the mailing list, what do we do for DAO? And mostly in storing mode, I mean, if nothing changes, that's a lot of DAO information you would like to refresh just to refresh the lifetime or something like that. So now there is a message which is an abbreviated DAO, which tells you same as last time, just refresh the lifetime. So you give the sequence number of last time and you say, well, just the same, refresh lifetime. So that makes a single message refreshing all thing equal for a very lower cost. So that was actually one of the new things compared to the interim. That was a mailing list discussion. So we have a new object to request the last version of the options in the disk. So you say what is your view of the last sequence, so the parent can decide. There's also a discussion like if two parents don't have the same sequence, that means one of them is kind of obsolete. You might have a parent which is not aware of the changes and the other that is. So obviously the text tells you use the parent which is aware of the most recent change, right?
Rahul Jadhav, regarding the abbreviated options, so there the assumption is that the DAO traverses the same path as before.
Yes,
But it might traverse a different path and it might update the different path.
if you have a parent that didn't get the same DAO as last time, you cannot use that. You have to give him everything.
But the node itself, which is sending the DAO, doesn't know.
Oh yeah. I mean, if something changes, you have to update, right? You have to update that.
Yeah, but the AO abbreviated option is the responsibility of the node to be sending it, and that node is not aware that something in between has changed. The path is not going to be the same. So if it sends an abbreviated option, all the intermediate 6LRs are not aware of the latest information.
If we can discuss that on the mailing list, but my feeling is if a parent so the child sends the abbreviated saying, oh, no change. The parent gets that, but he has a new parent. For the parent which was old, yeah, he can send the abbreviated. For the parent which is new, he sends based on his own state. But you need, again, to be able to rebuild the state. That was your discussion yesterday, right? The assumption is you can always rebuild the DAO from your state. So if you have a new parent which is not aware of the last variation, you need to tell him. Make sense? So A, B, C, right? A sends an abbreviated. B knows the abbreviated, say, oh, no change. D knew that, so you can send the abbreviated. E did not know it, new parent. You have to send the full version.
Yeah, the only problem that I see is now with the rich information that which we are propagating with the capabilities. Are we expecting every node to keep the capability in the routing table in context to each of the node below it? Because that's a big information, and we may not be able to do aggregated DAO in that sense, you know.
Yeah, the capability is an interesting thing, because if we say we'll define this new messaging for gathering capabilities, then it's not part of the DAO, so it's not really in our discussion. It's only for whatever we would like to place in DAO messages. I don't know if we'll place capabilities in DAO messages. So I think it's going to be all this new message you have to define, right?
So essentially, yeah. So either we need to say that we cannot send capabilities in DAO, or we cannot depend on the intermediate 6LRs to know the capability on behalf of all the subdued nodes.
So when we define the capability, we have to be very careful about this. So right now there are only 5 options, but that one of the big things that this specification gives us, apart from now the network can live on and you can update its configuration safely, blah, 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 is that we'll be able to have more options in REPL. So put more of ND into REPL, like SLLA option and whatever else, because it doesn't cost as long as it can be elided. It can be safely elided now. So that's kind of, you know, the big thing is this draft is simple, but it really opens up for a future where a live network evolves. Basically, the configuration changes, the prefix is updated, things like that. Now we can safely say, oh, everybody will be aware as soon as he gets a DIO that the prefix has changed. So even if the prefix is not there, we'll be able to pull it, and now we will know. So that makes, you know, our network much more manageable, or can live for much longer time. And a lot of what we are doing with this REPL v2 is to go around broad networks and live networks, right? and keep them alive all the time. You can't just stop them and start them again. It's very hard when you have thousands of nodes. So this is the abbreviated option that I discussed, which replaced the full option. So basically, all it says is there is only one abbreviated option, right? It's not one per option. So the abbreviated option is the abbreviated option, and what it tells you is the option value that I'm carrying is the option that's being abbreviated, and next to it is the sequence number associated. So you can find 5 times this thing with 5 different values of the abbreviated option, meaning PIO, configuration, blah, 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 5 of them. And for each one, you will see the last RCSS for which this option was modified. And so we updated this message, and this, please challenge this, because it's not necessarily needed. Think about it. We use some of the flags to say, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want that. But at the same time, we also say, here is the RCSS. So I'm the child, I'm sending this, and I'm saying, hey, here is the last sequence to which I was synchronized. So the parent could decide everything that changed and push it to the child. On this, I want that. The reason for the flag is like, okay, this information has changed, but I don't care, I'm not using it. I don't know which configuration that could be. But if one of those 5 things is of no interest to the child, then you would not set the bit. Is it a valuable thing to do? I'm not sure. It's just a proposal on the table. If we don't define those 5 flags, then the parent will give you everything that changed since your sequence number. That's going to be it. Works. So you tell me if those flags are useful or not. Personally, I don't know. I don't really have a case where a child would not care about an option. It's consuming 5 bits. So I can erase that on the next version. You just tell me. And if we have a long time, then we can read this. I won't read it. You can read it. So that's the mechanism. So part of the discussion is, can you detect a reboot of your parent, or well, actually, it's a root that sets the RCSS. Can we find a reboot? And the idea is, yes, because the straight part is very short this time, and it should be incremented rapidly. So the time during which a reboot cannot be identified is actually very short. I don't remember what initial value I put for RCSS, but maybe it's 254 or something, which means that 1 or 2 changes of the RCSS and bang, you're in the wrong part and you will detect a reboot. So it's still imperfect because of the straight part of the lollipop, but it's the windows will be very, very small where you don't detect a reboot. And something you didn't say, Raul, yesterday is, even if, okay, so you were here in the straight part somewhere, and you reboot, so you go down the straight part. So when you increment, you won't detect, but you will end up incrementing past the previous value, and at this point you detect. At this point you resync, I'm sorry. So it's not like you're stuck forever. Oh, okay, I explained that offline, but basically if you go left to back in time on the straight part, but you increment rapidly, there is a point where you will pass the old value, and at this time, people will detect your newer. So they will at least learn the new configuration. You're not stuck with the old configuration forever. I'm clear? I'm not clear? Okay.
We have time.
But I don't have a whiteboard.
Okay.
Rahul Jadhav, I think regardless of this point, we need to talk about the lollipop counter and the impact on persistent storage separately. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for all
we'll leave it
options.
for that discussion.
It's just that I don't expect that the lollipop in the DIO is an efficient tool. You said it. It's not an efficient tool for detecting reboot. I'm trying to make RCSS a more efficient tool to detect reboot. It's not perfect, but it's already tuned for two reasons to be much more efficient. First reason, the much shorter straight part. Second, much faster update. You can update it and update it and update it. It doesn't cost much.
Right.
And it's not like having to rebuild the DAG or anything.
So what I want to say here is you mentioned it already that the straight part, how long is that straight part going to be? And you said it should be shorter as possible. It has both implications. It has advantages, disadvantages. So those have to be considered.
Yes.
So I think that we should have a separate discussion for this one.
So right now, to resync a child will basically indicate the last sequence that he knows about. So basically it's the state of his database. If you are used to syncing LSDBs, and some of you guys are, it's pretty much the same idea. You have your own non-sequence for each of the options. And implicitly, so each option bears the sequence of the last time it was presented in full. And so you know where you are. Last sequence I saw was 20, and I see that the DIO has 23, so there must have been 3 changes that I'm not aware of, but I don't know what those changes are. So I send a disk to the parent with 20, and the parent should send me back everything I need all the way to 23. It might need more than one message to get there because of MTU. Okay, so to make sure that I have all the information all the way to 23, I need to see all the options, either in the abbreviated form or in the full form. If the options has changed, the parent will send it me in the full form with the new RCSS. I'm done. If the option was not changed between 20 and 23, the parent will send me the option in the abbreviated form saying 19 or whatever. So I know that even if I'm at 23, this option was still in 19, and I did not need to get the new value for it. So that's how it works. Now, like I said, there are those 5 bits, which are the 5 options we can elide, and the child can actually, right now, must indicate which one it wants. And if it's always all once, then maybe we can avoid those flags. Alex.
Just a short question. Does that mean that
Alexander, you need to state your name?
Yes, Alexander. So is it possible? So does that mean that the nodes need to keep the full story, the full history of the options as they change?
The node needs to know the latest version, not the full story. So
I mean, if you get version 23 and did that change?
You don't need to get the intermediate value. You want the latest of each, right? So the parent will tell you, it doesn't care what you know. It cares about the level where you are. And
yeah, I mean, okay, if it knows that you're on level 20.
So the child is level 20, option 5 is 21, say. So the parent knows that option 5 is 21. So 21 above 20, I need to send it in full. Whether it was changed for 21, 22, 23, I don't care. I just have to know it was changed since 20, so I have to send it in full.
Okay.
So it's not the history, it's the latest.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Like I said, you can easily spread them over more than one DIO, but if most of them were not changed, then they're only sent in the abbreviated form. So the expectation is most of the time you don't want to spread them into multiple DIOs. And that's pretty much...
Thank you very much, Pascal.
Rahul Jadhav.
Rahul, yeah.
So one of the modifications that we have seen was with regards to the disk modifications in the same draft. So we have decided to combine the work for disk modifications with the eliding, and we have that couple of options, but we haven't really talked about it, right? So
yeah, that's true. I mean, and we need maybe Dominique to come up. So yes, let me give you some context here. So there was a draft about this. I hope we are talking about the same thing. There was a draft about providing some options to the DS to decide whether the answer should be multicast or unicast and things like that. And so the discussion was just like 2 bits. Couldn't we package that discussion into this draft? And I'm completely positive with that. We want feedback. And yes, please.
Yeah, just an update on that. I think we published a new version after the I mean, right now, or okay. So it's on a GitHub, but not published yet. We've started merging those two drafts. So in the current most updated version, I'm proposing that the 2 bits we had in a DIS modification draft be the 2 bits that are left in Pascal's format. And there are more questions that we had in a DIS modification drafts, which were, do we reset the trickle timer? Do we respond back with a unicast or multicast DIOs? And I think all these questions are relevant to Pascal's querying options as well. So we're going to work on that together. So that the intention is indeed to merge the DIS modification drafts into this one.
Yes, and I have some comments about those 2 bits. So if we have time, then we can start the work on this piece.
Yes, we have time.
So if we kind of agree that it's a good idea to just put them here as opposed to having a draft for that. The first thing is, the original repo gives you, oh, if the message was unicast or multicast, then you should reset this or not, or you should respond unicast or multicast. You don't hear me?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So the repo specification basically gave you complex behavior, which really depends on the request. If the request is unicast or multicast, or if the
Yeah, the logic was
well,
hardwired
the logic
into the
was hard.
protocol.
Yes, yes. So for those 2, yes. So the bits should not signal whether you use trickle or whether you use multicast. In my mind, they should signal whether you reverse the ripple behavior, because otherwise you need a 3rd bit. If you want to be able to signal, because if you basically want to send a multicast, but you want to reverse the behavior of ripple to respond multicast, I don't know, then the bit should signal, hey, do the reverse of what ripple does. Otherwise, I don't set the bit and we're back to original ripple. Because if you have to live with legacy nodes which don't support your stuff, I mean, there must be a way to say, hey, when the bit is 0, it really means something new.
Right.
Right? And so you'd need a 3rd bit to say, hey, I'm in this new mode where I'm doing those things. Unless you say, hey, the value 0 is always what Ripple did before, so I'm backward compatible. In which case, when you set the value 1, you reverse what Ripple was doing. So depending on whether it's unicast or multicast and blah, blah, then setting the bit would reverse that. You see what I mean?
I hear what you're saying. I think it's been some time since we've updated the DIS modification draft, but I think the current ripple behavior is too complex so that you can reverse it with just 1 bit, because it has all these cases. So what we did is we had 1 bit which was a no inconsistency bit, which basically when it was set to 0, which was a reserved value anyway, in the original draft, would not change current ripple behavior. So we had backward compatibility. And so we need to
yes, let's discuss that on the mailing list, but
as soon
ideally,
as we can allocate time.
So that's one piece. The other piece is I talked to the team implementing that at Cisco, and they had this interesting observation, like they would like to be able to send the disk in the form of multicast so as to cancel the emission of a disk by other nodes. So if, for instance, they have this case that we call power outage, where all the nodes die together, right? And now they restart. And guess what? They all want to send a disk. But if they trickle out this thing, one will send first. If the disk is sent unicast to the old parent, to the previous parent, then the other children won't hear it. So they won't be able to refrain from sending a disk. And so what they really want to achieve is, I want to send a disk to my previous parent because probably I'm rebuilding the same network. So I want to send the disk unicast, but still I want the other children to, well, I want the unicast behavior of Ripple for this, like not resetting the, well, we have to look at that, but
yeah.
The bottom line is I want the other guys to hear that I sent this disk, so they don't send a disk. They just wait for the DIO multicast from the parent. So basically, I'm the winner. I send the disk first. I won't set the bit so the response is multicast. I don't necessarily want to reset trickle. That's another discussion. Well, maybe I do because I generate. Yeah, I need to reset trickle because that's how it generates a multicast. So at the end of the day, yes, I would set the multicast bit, but I want that even the disk is heard by the other guys. So in the meantime, between I send a disk and the multicast response is sent, the other guys don't also send this, which could interfere with the DIO.
Right. Right. So
And
this is a use case that's already described in the DIS modification draft, but so far we expected the DIO that would be sent as a multicast to be heard by all the neighboring nodes.
but that's the window you
And
trigger.
you're going a step further, having the other nodes overhear the DIS so that they refrain from sending their own DIS. So
Right.
that's even
And so
better.
we looked at that and we thought that we could have a multicast address which is derived from the parent. So we already in V6 have RFC 2630, I don't remember what, which is how you derive a multicast address from a prefix, right? This exists. There is an automatic formation of an IPv6 multicast group per prefix. Here, everybody has the same prefix. We don't care about the prefix, but we would love to be able to configure a multicast address within the current prefix of this REPL domain for the suffix, for the IID of the parent, meaning that if you're a child of this parent, you would always listen to that multicast address, and obviously the parent himself would listen to that multicast address. So when you send a packet to that multicast address, only the parent can reply with the multicast DIO, but the other guys hear it, so now they refrain from sending the disk. So the trick we had in mind was to create this new multicast address that would just be this parent and these children. And there is a side effect to this, which is quite interesting, is the children will do MLD to their parent to say, hey, I'm listener. And now that gives you a way for a child to declare to the parent, I'm your child. Because the way we did non-storing, the child sends a packet to the root, but the parent doesn't really know if he has children. I mean, it can infer it from traffic or what, but there is no explicit signaling say, I'm your child. It exists for the rule, but does not exist for normal non-storing. And so having this multicast group and registration to the multicast group gives the parent an idea of the children that it has, because that's all the member of the multicast group for its address. So we were looking at that. Just if you have ideas, comments on this.
Rahul Jadhav, I just want to comment on the whole utility of we having a way for telling all the other nodes to overhear the disk and not send it. What I'm trying to say is the scenario where a node sends a disk, where a lot of nodes are sending disks, is a one-off scenario where all the nodes gets rebooted. Let's say even if they send all of them send the disks. What the problem that we have currently, which is already addressed by the draft, is that the DIO trickle timer won't get resetted. Once we have that solution, then the DIO is sent to everyone, and everyone stops at this anyways. So I mean, if we don't go the other way, we can avoid a lot of complication. Is what I'm trying to say. Let the nodes send this anyways.
Okay, so yes, it's two things. You said two things. The first one is, I think, a misunderstanding of what it means to reset the trickle timer. There is a difference between resetting a trickle timer and restarting a trickle timer. And the spec fails to discuss that correctly. So basically, we should re-specify what it means to reset a trickle timer so you don't have this problem. Basically, if your trickle timer is very long because the network was very stable, if you reset the trickle timer, mean I equal I0.
Yeah, reset the period.
You need to
not the
restart it
timer.
because otherwise it will time out in the long future. So you need not only to reset I to I0, which is really what reset the trickle timer means, but you need also to restart the trickle timer. So now you fall into this between I and I0. But if you reset it again, and it's already started for this short value, there is no point in restarting the timer. That's a mistake. If you restart the timer, it will never elapse. You should not restart it. So you should let it elapse because it's already in the right region. So we need to specify that so you don't have your problem. But I don't think we need signaling. We need to better specify what it needs to reset the trickle timer.
So just a clarification here, when I said resetting, I mean going back to the I mean. Okay, so there is no use case where we restart at the current I value, I interval. So that there is no reason why a node can reset the DIO timer to the current I value. It always resets it back to the I mean.
Yes, but if I equal I mean already.
Huh?
If you're already in I mean, then well, yeah, but the problem is at that time you should not restart the timer. If you're already in I mean, you should not restart the timer. If you restart, you will keep restarting it for every disk, and then it will never elapse. So the mistake here, it's an implementation discussion for your other draft, the observation. You should observe the way Trickle is implemented. And the observation is, if I more than I mean or I0, then resetting means I equal I mean or I0. And because now you will elapse further than that, you need to restart your timer. But if I is already equal to I mean, then you're already elapsing in the expected window, let it run. Don't restart the timer. That's what it means. So this discussion is not in report, it's not well enough explained. I have to go to the Trickle RFC because it should have been written there. But if it's not, then we need a section in your document explaining exactly that. If I equal I mean, don't restart the timer. Boom. This problem goes away. Now, the other problem, you say it's one in a case, but it's a real problem. We have it in the field. The real problem is go to Canada. Some of us are from Canada. And go down the basement of a big building, and you will find all the electrical meters on the wall, and there can be 200 of them. Now, outage in this building, 200 nodes got out of power, bang. So they have to notify the utility that they lost power. They have to send this power outage notification, bang. And so we have all sorts of problems being able to do that. But the worst case is now when you power back up again, guess what? All those nodes start sending this at the same time on the same frequencies, blah, blah, blah. They interfere with one another. They interfere with the DIO. It's a cacophony. Nobody hears anything, right? So what you really want to do is either the router is lucky sends the DIO before, or one of them sends the first disk, and the router sends the DIO. But if all the others, 200 plus nodes, send this at the same time, it's really a cacophony. So for us, it's a real field problem that we have, right? And it's not unusual. It's just the way meters are deployed. So we have to do something about it.
Yeah, we need to define the use cases, and I think we have.
I'm
started
sorry
this way.
to interrupt here again, but this is solved with the current text, isn't it? I mean, if we stop resetting the trickle timer, and our definition of resetting the trickle timer is going back to I mean, if we stop that and we'll let other nodes send this, the DIO trickle timer won't get resetted, and other nodes will hear the DIO and they will stop sending this and start.
Yeah, but what Pascal wants is
Between now and I mean.
Yeah, but
That's a lot of messages. Okay. So as soon as the DIO multicast is sent with the bits, thanks to the bits that you have, then yes, the cacophony stops if the nodes hear the DIO. But if they're sending this at that time, they won't even hear the DIO, and they will keep sending this. So you can't receive and transmit at the same time, right? So, I mean, there is a weird moment where everybody wants to talk and nobody listens, just like in this room. No, I'm not joking. There needs to be, and Trickle is good at that, there needs to be a winner. Either the parent sending the DIO, that's perfect, or a child sending a disk. But then everybody should be silent till, because the DIO is not instantaneous. The whole principle of Trickle is the response is always delayed by something akin to admin, right, in the order of admin. And so during that time, today, with the current implementations in the field, everybody shouts, nobody listens, right? And the DIO is lost, and even the disk, sometimes it's so much cacophony that even the parent doesn't hear the disk because it's interfered by the others.
right. Pascal, can I just make a comment on that? We must be careful, though, not to be trying to solve layer 2 issues. So it's good to understand the use case, but what you're describing is just a medium access problem. So we can help it, but we shouldn't be solving it at layer 3.
I mean, if the solution is as simple as defining a multicast address per parent, I mean, that's not so hard, right? It's really layer 3 solution for a prime.
So yeah, I'm saying we can have an option that helps, but we shouldn't pretend we're solving it by ourselves. Same in our draft, we had this spreading option as well for the responses. When you know, if it's the opposite situation, a new node that joins the network and has no idea what routers are around, so it's sending a multicast DIS to all routers.
It's a different situation, because in that case, he will send it to all parents, all routers. He will not send it to the multicast address of his previous parent.
Right, it's a different problem.
Different case,
but
so we can differentiate
I'm
them.
saying, in this case, you have all the routers that respond at the same time. So we proposed an option.
Not at the same time, there's trickle.
No, because in current version of Ripple, this is an inconsistency. So they
Yes.
will.
So you restart trickle to I0, but
And-
still you trickle.
You get
a
a
quick
unicast DIO response, which is immediate, which is not governed by a trickle. Okay, let's discuss about that.
Of the unicast, yeah.
And then we added that option to spread responses, so to avoid the DIO storm. So maybe we need the similar mechanism the other way around for your use case.
Yes, love it.
Thank you very much, guys. One question in general, do we need a document that explains what's happened with the node when restart? What do you think? Because there's a lot of status.
So as of now, the discussions that we had yesterday,
Yeah.
somehow, I'm Rahul Jadhav, by the way, yeah. So I'm planning to update the same document observations draft with most of the text. At some point of time, maybe the working group might feel that this can be published as a separate document, or maybe
Yeah.
working group might decide that at later point of time, if it has enough substantial material which needs a publication, in that case, we can take a call, something like that. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
Basically, we see the text, we check the text in the observations draft first, or
yeah.
or if we decide that right now it clearly requires a different document, then then it's a clear call.
Yeah, but as for example, each document has like a security consideration. We maybe can include like a section, what happened when a node restart. So we can feel that, because there are always questions. So we can kind of have a mandatory section, well, mandatory, like what happened when that will be nice in each document, have that section. I don't know, what do you think?
I believe that Raoul's document on the observations is so useful. And
Yes,
at
yes,
least very rapidly, we should capture what was said today in Raoul's document. So at least we have a status of that. We know this problem, we discussed it, and here is where we are. At least, I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, having a section on exactly, but already writing down, for instance, the trickle timer, resetting trickle doesn't mean restarting the timer necessarily. Oh, that's important, it must be written somewhere. And so all this discussion about the use of the bits, etc. So we need to complete on the mailing list the agreement on the bits that are inherited from the other thing, which also relates to the fact that I'm using 5 of those bits, and it's not awfully necessary. So if we start using those bits, remember I'm using 5 bits. And so that means, kind of a waste. So it seems to me that if we really start finding a real, more important use of the bits, maybe we should remove those ones. Because it seems a lot more important to be able to do what Dominic wants to do with those bits than to signal I want this or I want that.
Just one more, Rahul Jadhav. Just one more thing that I would like to mention in this context is that we should expect future specification to generate new options, which should be it should be possible to elide them as well. And we give some sort of considerations in this document saying that if you have a new option and it rarely changes, then you should follow so and so things.
You should what?
I mean, you have to define a sequence number for every option. Do you really need it? So some sort of considerations for new or future options, because we see already that there are going to be future options.
Okay. Yes, sure. I must not forget that.
Yes, I mean, with the minutes.
Okay.
Don't worry,
Yes,
we
I
will
mean,
track all this.
I try to do it very rapidly before I don't forget. But yes,
Thank you very much, Raul. Yes, please add what you say in the observations. Thank you.
if you could write that in a few words in a mail, so I could respond and say yes, proposal, blah blah blah. And we're through, right?
Yeah. So for adoption, I hope first, if you agree, we can publish your merged documents, and then we go for adoption. Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Comments, questions? Okay. Thank you, Raul. Thank you very much, Pascal.
So Dominique, the ball is in your camp. Dominique at half.
As a contributor, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and so please give a thought to what I said about reversing bits, and maybe we talk offline, and then we'll publish that, and we'll tell you we're ready. Yes.
Yeah, I think the way we wrote it in the IS modification is already what you want, but I'll make sure and we discuss it.
Thank you. Raul? We have for it.
Oh, all
Yes.
right. Okay.
No, don't worry.
Rahul Jadhav. I'm going to talk about the updates to the NPDAO. It went into the ISG last call. We received all the ISG reviews, and then we had an update. One important update rather. We are now carrying an Ripple status as part of DCO. While this is very generic and it is important for DCO, the node generating the DCO to sort of give a reason why is it generating the DCO in the first place. So it is regardless of the unaware leaves proposition, it is important for DCO to give this reason. We should have identified that in the first place, but now we have it. But this slide explains you the impact of unaware leaves on this particular draft, and we have seen Pascal has already explained it, but what we have here is we have the RPL status format changed. We have another bit which is mentioning whether it is rather ND status. So now this text I've picked up from unaware leaves, but it is quite important to be noted in this context. Now the reason the number 130 that has been mentioned currently in the NPDAO DCO draft, it may not be correct. So that has to be changed. So there is one update that will be required even after this. It's just a change of number. There's no change in the IANA consideration, but yeah, there is still a change required.
So sorry I missed that one. We just discovered it by reviewing with Raul like yesterday or something. But we had a more interesting discussion, if I may say, is that since now we are carrying the status, and the status can be 1 to 127, like the EBIT is not set, then we could really make the future of DCO a lot brighter if we said that instead of being always a killer for the path, it can also be carrying an indication and not kill the path. Right now, if you get a DCO, regardless of the value of the DCO, you kill the path, regardless of the status of the Ripple status. But the Ripple status has the EBIT, which tells you, hey, it's a rejection or not. So one sentence somewhere in that spec that says that if the EBIT is what we described so far is valid if the EBIT is indicating rejection, but otherwise you just forward the DCO and you do what you know about the status that's in there, if you understand it, then we could use this message for new cases. And actually we had one yesterday. So it looks like I would like to see this additional change to say, hey, don't discard the path if the EBIT is reset. And if you understand the value and the value tells you to do something, do it. Otherwise, just pass the DCO on down the path. And this way we can signal non-error information down the path. For instance, I have too many children. I need to rebalance the tree, which is the use case we had yesterday. So it's an encouragement of people down the path to reparent somewhere, so we rebalance the graph. It's just one case, but we thought, hey, that's the only message we have that flies asynchronously down from the root. And just using it for one purpose is kind of a waste, right? Having the capability to say, hey, it can be more than a rejection. It can also be a status, a warning status, like I'm overloaded. But you can keep me, but if you can switch to somebody else, that would be better. It's not an outright rejection. It makes this message a lot more useful and powerful. Reaction, knee-jerk.
Hi, Alvaro Rotana. That's a big change, very big change, for several reasons. Not only are you using the message for something else, which is great. I love reuse. If that's what we want to do, that's perfect. The draft says a couple of things besides that. It says something about not expecting the nodes to do anything based on the status.
Yes, which is what we changed, exactly.
Now you're changing that, right?
Exactly.
And the other part that really concerns me is the fact that you say that the status, I forget the exact words, must not change or something on the path. That's great, but there's not a real way to enforce that. Right? Meaning when I get the message from whoever's above me, I don't know if that was what he got from the guy above them, right? From his parent.
There is no zero trust security.
Right. So,
But that's true for anything.
you know, that's,
true for the whole DIO.
I understand. It's just a way that is written, that maybe was written in the draft, that because we can't enforce that, then we can't really say you must not change it, right? So we need to be clear about those cases and be clear about the fact that I can now tell someone, hey, you need to reparent for no apparent reasons, right? Just because I want to. Of course, that's maybe better than telling them the path is not available at all. Right? Correct. So maybe that's a little bit better, but there's still things there. I am obviously not opposed to you doing this stuff. We might need a lot more review.
But we're stuck in this right now.
Yes, what I mean is we might have to go back to the ASG or somewhere. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, please. My bottom line is, if we keep the text as it is, the nodes will effectively not, because of this must, will not look at the status, which means that this creates a backward compatibility issue whereby even if we want to extend it in the future, if we have a legacy node, it will kill the route, which is not what that's sad. Having this bit which says, if you don't understand it, but at least destroy, not destroy, something that's proven very useful in ND and many other use cases, right? What you do when you don't understand it. So overall, the idea is, okay, we did not expect the nodes to understand it and they would destroy the route. Now, at least we say, hey, if you don't understand it, but it's a warning, you don't destroy the route, you pass it on. That was so useful in other protocols. I can wait for the RFC number if we get this additional feature. I'm ready to go through reviews now. And like I said, we're in misdraft for rule anyway. So if what we do here is faster than what we do for the rule, that does not delay the RFC anyway.
I just want to say the statement at the enforcement policy that Alvaro you mentioned. There is no way for the nodes, intermediate nodes. Intermediate nodes can essentially change it, and there's no way to enforce it. But the same is true even for the existing DAO messages. So if we completely depend upon the L2 security or the security or mechanisms in RPL for that. So yeah. Okay, that's so there will be an update. Yeah. yeah. So there's.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, you will update the draft and then we will request for reviews. We will update the draft. You will update the draft and then we'll request for reviews. So now, Pascal, please. And this draft is going to be for working. We have 40 minutes 40.
I need 5.
Okay, so you have
That
40
should
stay for you.
work. Okay, so basically, there's this need to update a brownfield network that we did not foresee earlier, but we kind of realized that the notion of flag day was not very feasible in some applications of Ripple, like a DAG of thousands of nodes. And so if you want to introduce a function like the new hop-by-hop RPI value, or the fact that you want to use the compression that we enable with 8138, then the way you would do it is progressively install the new software in the devices which are capable of doing those new things. But the whole network needs to use the same functions. So as long as you've got back-level devices, you cannot reuse it. So if the new software said just use it and the old software was not using it, then your network would be inconsistent. So there is the need to replace the flag day by a process whereby you upgrade the nodes at the speed you can, and when they're all upgraded, then you fire a bit somewhere, and everybody works with the new operation. So that's the way that we solve the problem in the use of Ripple information for the new value of the hop-by-hop option of the RPI. And we have the exact same problem for another Ripple-specific operation, which is the use of compression. So it's not, there was discussion on the mailing list, like, oh, it's not the shape of the geodag. Well, the configuration is not just the shape of the geodag, it's everything that Ripple does. And the compression is one of those things that Ripple does that needs to be homogeneous within a particular geodag. If you have a multi-geodag configuration, maybe one geodag uses it and the other does not, but at least under a certain route as part of your subnet, but not necessarily the whole subnet, you need to know if it's on or if it's off. And you need to be able to deploy the nodes with the new software and they see it's off so they don't use it. And when all the software is installed everywhere, then you can decide to turn it on. So this is a configuration thing. It's not the same thing as the capability. The capability is whether the new software can do it or not. It's useful to have a capability to say that the new software can do it, because now when you know that every node can do it, you can automatically turn it on. But you might also know that every node can do it because you know you're done upgrading your network, or because you have another management protocol, and we have one, by the way, which tells you that. So there is not a strong tie between the configuration that says turn it on and the capability that says it's available. Capability is a very useful thing. We can live without it, because we have other means to manage the devices which are not based on the capability, right? So does this need to wait for the capability draft? No. Does this need a normative reference to the capability draft? No. Is it something that's useful in standalone? Yes. Just like it's actually a miss. Use of Ripple info as the bit. We did not miss that time. But when we wrote 8138, we are so concerned by the compression that we forgot the brownfield and we forgot to put this bit. So it's just catching up with a miss. That's no more than that. Draft has been very, very, very stable. There were discussions about, is there other ways to do that rather than the compression? The 6CIO is ND. It talks about a subnet, not a geodag. We should not make ND aware of our subdag configuration or Ripple specific stuff, so it doesn't look like a good idea in this case. And now, if we did it in 6CIO, it would be harder to tie with the capability. I would like to do the same thing for using the hop-by-hop and for using the compression, because it's a very similar problem, so it's cool to be consistent the way we approach those problems. Somebody said we could use a new protocol. So yes, let's define a new protocol that spreads through the network and all use new messages just to carry one bit. Why not? Well, I'm not too good for that. So I think we're kind of okay and ready for last call.
For adoption.
Oh.
Yeah, first for adoption.
Oh, adoption. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Ooh,
no, it's
thank-
fine.
Well, both.
Michael.
It's just one bit, right? At the end of the day, it's just one damn bit.
They're all just bits, just one at a time. Michael here. So Pascal explained to me the disconnect between between capabilities and this document. I was not previously happy with turn on not using capabilities to enable itself, but now I understand what he's proposing, that later on we may have a capability that asks where we can discover if the network is 8138 ready. In Pascal's case, and I believe this is a metering networks, when the installer's been to every single home, they know that they've upgraded the meters or the whatever, because in most cases those devices are installed by putting a fiber optic cable and into the front of the meter and updating the firmware. So they've done them all. I guess it takes 2 years or something to visit every home, and then they turn on 8138, right? And if they lose some devices, I guess they screwed up and missed some, and that's all. So I support doing this. I understand the somewhat urgency of it, okay, right? It would be nice, again, it would be nice if we had the capabilities document sufficiently advanced that you could just use this, but to announce, to turn it on as well as discover. But I agree that it's going to take us a little while to do this, and I think you urgently need this. So there you go.
Thank you, Michael.
Rahul Jadhav, I completely agree with that. We need this kind of stuff, but the one thing that I want to mention is that basically what it avoids is what we are sort of avoiding through this is a flag day operations where we now know the root can signal all the nodes that something is now can be turned on by. So what I'm trying to say is, eventually we'll have other mechanisms which have to be turned on by the root after the discovery of that mechanism. So is it possible for us to generalize this so that it can be used for other purposes as well, and not only for 8138? So this is a generic problem statement where the root needs to tell all the nodes in the network. And the reason why I'm concerned is because now we are making use of the DIO base objects, the configuration options flag, which are limited.
Yeah.
And if we use for specific purpose as 8138, and I see a reason why we are doing it, but eventually we'll need this for other things as well. So so is it possible for us to do it generically such that in the future, if the root has to say to all other nodes that you can start using this, not only for 8138?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think it relates a lot with the MOP, because we had a similar problem with the MOP. And I expect that when we need more room, and we have the REPL configuration option, right? We'll extend the REPL configuration option for more bit space or whatever. So for now, we don't need it. Let's use the space we have. The very cool thing is, because of the other draft eliding, we can make the configuration bigger, because now we can elide it easily and we can update it easily. So for the future, I guess we'll take the bits from the REPL configuration option and not from the base. From external new options to the REPL configuration option. So basically, so for now we can live with what we have. So use it, but be prepared, yes, to have TLVs in the configuration option in the future, just like you're doing for the MOP, and I think, right? But yes, you can start thinking about this mechanism, and if you want to piggyback that with the MOPX, why not? Because it's infrastructure. We're not really using MOPX, right? We're just saying, hey, the value 7 will mean REPL v2, but we are not defining new MOPs at the moment. Same thing, we could already start providing the mechanism to put new options in the configuration option, and if something's missing, and so we have the infra ready. So
Rahul
I'm all
Jadhav?
for it.
Sorry. So I just want to say that, in this case, equating it to MOPEX might not be, because if we start using MOPEX for such purposes, it will result in all the combinate.
I'm not saying use MOPEX. I'm saying, MOPEX is an
Live.
infrastructure document, which does not really create a new MOP. It just enables us to extend the MOP space. In the same fashion, maybe if we need to do something to be able to extend the configuration space with new options, and you want to give formats or something like that to ignore them or understand them or things like that, then you could package that with MOPEX if you don't define anything new, but just a generic transport or signal for those things, just like MOPEX is a generic transport for new maps. Though the maps don't exist, right? There's no new map. So I was just wondering if you could answer your own question in the split MOPEX, but on the MOPEX side, not as just as infrastructure that could be needed.
Right. So my concern was that we will use this bit in DIO configuration option, and this bit will linger on for a long time since even once the 8138 option is readily used in the network. So this bit will become like
wasted. But by then we will have the configuration option there with extensions and whatever. Yeah, I see the problem, right? But it's true for the hop by hop also. I mean, you can argue that in 2 years from now, everybody will be using X23, and then signaling it will become useless. Okay, so same problem. I don't have an answer.
Michael here. Sorry, I had to go to the bathroom. But I just heard the last bit of the conversation. Pascal, what if we made this document experimental?
This one?
Yeah. Because then the allocation of the bit would be essentially revocable.
So how do you differentiate that from the user-free.info? Like, should that also be experimental in user-free.info?
Should
Because
the allocation of the bit be experimental?
Or temporary? Or
Yeah,
something?
it would be easier if we had split that off into a separate document, and then we could mark it experimental as well. And so instead we would have to write another document in the future if we did a 6550 bis, when we would then mark that bit as deprecated, right? So we could also reclaim this bit in a 6550 bis as that way. That would be another option.
I don't know.
I mean, nodes that don't have not 8138, right? If they see an announcement and the bit's not on, they will fail because they don't have they can't. I mean, you can always run uncompressed, right? So we mandate that, but
I mean,
right.
the alternate is to say, hey, MOP7 meaning Ripple v2, 8138 is mandatory in Ripple v2, so blah. You could also do that, but well.
we discussed that yesterday, and I like that a little bit as the right way, but you may need this bit beforehand.
Yes.
And all I'm saying is that going forward as experimental might and that's what we did with ECN, right?
Yeah, but the methods will be deployed. And so if you tell them that the bit is deprecated, they don't really care. They are deployed and they operate unless you reflash them. And the smart meter operator will not replace the software just because the bit was deprecated.
Of course not. But they also won't, if they don't replace the software, period, going forward.
So you can't deprecate that bit. That's what I mean, right? And
Well,
you will still need to deploy new devices, which may need the new variation of the bit now. And so that creates an immense problem. I don't.
So what I'm trying to say is so next year you deploy new software, and it takes a year for an operator to actually deploy it to all the households, because that's I would say realistic. We're talking about probably a truck roll guy walking down the street updating, because a lot of these meters don't necessarily, they have they're field upgradable, but not in band field upgradable, not over the air. Okay, at least the one in my house is not upgradable there. have in times come, removed the meter, put it in a truck. Well, they probably put a new one on it, but put it in a truck, upgraded it, put it back, and I've had no power for 10 minutes, right? That's how it's worked. But I'm told that they don't have to remove the meter. They just are become overly cautious about electrocuting themselves. But the point is that it takes some time, as you're saying, it takes some time before the network is upgraded, and then they turn the bit on, okay? And then they run for a number of years, during which there's probably other software patches that come out, and they apply them. At some point, you make the decision, you know what? We are no longer ship support for having the bit off, right? If the bit is turned off, the meter won't run. Right? I mean,
Hateful.
in this case, it's a little bit weird because you can always not compress as well. Like 8131 lets you compress better, right? And if you just don't compress so well, that's just, the network just copes with it. So in this case, it's a little bit weird because you can always run, if you have 8138, you can always not use it, is I believe is still the case, right?
I don't see that. I mean, the mechanism looks good the way you describe it, but in the real world, I don't see that the world will care if this bit was experimental, and some vendors may. So you know, it's most like at some point you plan to reuse it, and that's the day the nightmare starts. Because if you want to interoperate with an old implementation that sees that this bit means that, and that guy was not reflashed, and now you say, oh, I have to reflash my whole network. And maybe there is this thing in a particular deployment which is not so homogeneous that still speaks the old language of that bit. I'm really, really concerned that when we reuse the bit for something else, it will create a nightmare. I don't believe that
let me go
the
back
world
a
cares
question. Let
about
me go a question.
experimental.
If we could find a way to reuse the bit, would you be happier, Rahul? That maybe that's the better question to ask you, right? Maybe marketing experimental is not the right way to figure this out, but that's what I just heard as I came back in the room, is that you would like to be able to reclaim the bit sometime in the future, right? Not next year, not in 5 years, but sometime during the period of the lifespan of some of these networks, we may want to reclaim that bit.
Yeah, so we need to define the method for that. Like say, there is another something next to it which tells you the version of those bits. If it's version 0, it's use of REPL info plus RFC 8138. And when we go version 1, those bits will mean something completely different. But at least the current software can already know if those bits mean that or not. And if it means it's future thing, then it will see, oh, version is 2 now, so I don't know what those bits are, but they don't mean what I think they mean.
Well, I'm happy if we decided that was MOP equals 7.
MOP equals 7 will live with this current value. I mean, if you say MOP equals 7 implies the 2 bits are set, that's what you mean? Ask the world.
That's what I'm saying. Right?
So
it implies that we're moving forward.
You could already deprecate the one in use of REPL.
Yes, well, that's right. So the point is a MOP equals 7, is already going to be a sufficient interesting change that yes, we could deprecate the other bits if we needed to.
But you also mean that the support of 8138 is mandatory. And I thought that it should be. Well, I sent an email this morning, so you didn't have time to read it. No. But the bottom line was, okay, now we're a REPL v2 node. What is mandatory was optional.
But it might not be MOP equals 7 makes it. It might be MOP equals 7 plus MOP X values will say what's going on, right? But that I'm saying is that something in that space sounds like the way that we're getting to REPL v2, okay? And when we get there quickly or slowly, I don't know, but that sounds like the process by which we should essentially obsolete some of the compatibility options. It's at that stage that we should say that. Whether and I'm not picky whether at which particular thing is the clue, the statement that we're at quote v2, right? And that doesn't mean that we've spun the document even, right? Because that may be a lot more effort. We may want to wait for a little while and then we spin the document, remove stuff nobody used, right? There. So Alvaro, you probably already spoke while I was in the washroom.
No, it's a very important discussion. I was wondering why we needed that much time for this document, but now I realize it's useful. But because it's not really this document, right? It's really those bits will be there forever, and it's a waste.
And
forever.
we don't have very many of them, and so that's why we're anxious about it.
Yeah.
Right. That's the issue. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's not this draft. It's really the land.
So
that we are using.
do you agree, Earl, that you don't have a fundamental problem with them using the bit? It's how we get the bit back, right? So yeah. And so maybe we just don't have to solve that problem with this document.
Because it's already there with the other one.
As I said, that's what I'm just saying. I'm really just hold my nose and go, okay, it's not the best solution that I would like.
Because
but
this document applies to a network with MOP non-storing. So we could
Correct.
say, as long as the MOP is the current non-storing, at least the bits mean this.
Yes.
And then we can always delay to the future when the MOP is 7 to say what happens.
So maybe the document should say this document applies to MOP non-storing. I don't know if you want to apply it to storing as well. I'm open to that statement. Okay. But you may not. But then you may want to say that this bit is undefined for other MOP values until such time as someone else decides whether it's defined or not. Right?
Is it wrong? Do you want to go and make the same edition for use of repo? Because it's still in our hands.
Michael, again, so we would say it applies to the MOP value for storing with multicast and the MOP value for storing without multicast or whatever it was, and the MOP value for not storing. I can't remember what the list of the three of
So
them
you
are.
want this RFC to say that it applies to the other?
No, I'm saying in use of RIPL, we would also qualify our
Oh.
use of the bit to say it's the three values of MOP that I think are the relevant three that matter. And I don't think there's any other ones. There's one that no one uses or something, right?
Right.
I can't remember what the list is, but
So the plan, if I can summarize, the plan is I change this draft. Well, we can still call for adoption, right? Because it doesn't
Please
change.
adopt.
Can
yes.
still go for
But I
adoption.
changed the draft to say, hey, by the way, this bit is only defined if the MOP is below 7. First thing. Then you go on use of repo, you do the same thing. This
Okay,
bit
below 7.
applies only
Yeah.
if the MOP is below 7. And the third thing, but I don't remember what. We still have to look at my email where I say, what does 7 mean, basically? What is optional, what is mandatory or something? Okay, so we have a Raul, is it satisfactory? Oh, Alvaro.
Alvaro, I just have a question because I'm maybe a little bit lost. Are any other bits dependent on the MOP or just this one?
I think it's the first time.
Because in reality, what it sounds that you're doing is that you're creating sort of a different registry. I mean, right, because the way IANA does things, right, there's the registry, and it says this bit is whatever, right? Today, it doesn't differentiate between the MOPs, right? So basically, by saying this only applies to some MOPs and not others, you're sort of adding columns to the registry
We are.
to say this bit applies, 1 through 6 or whatever. This other bit applies to everything, or whatever it is. Because later, right, if you do MOP 8 or something, and now you say that this bit means something else,
It's a different registry.
right, and you ask IANA to register it, well, how do you register that? Because it's already there, right?
Yes.
Unless you modify the registry somehow. And sure, I mean, there are many registries that have, columns and, whatever, right? It's a 3D
It
registry.
was done already in the past, yes. I've
But
seen
so
that.
it would have to, I think the registry would have to be modified for that, right? It's not as easy as just saying in one sentence, it only applies
Right, I mean,
here.
there is already a INR section, but it just says the bit, doesn't say the column, right?
Right, exactly. So that's what I mean. There's no column today.
Right.
So someone somewhere in one of these documents has to update the registry so that now and in the future for every other bit, you have to indicate what MOPs the bit is valid for. So, I mean, it gives you a lot more flexibility and it actually gives you a lot more bits, right? Because now you can have all the bits applied to one specific one or not applied to something or, whatever.
I completely agree for one. And I was thinking as we went on which document should be doing this. I was thinking of the case I have in mind is 6LoWPAN. In 6LoWPAN, initially we started with the bits in just one table, and then we did RFC 8025. 8025 basically is mostly about saying that the 6LoWPAN compression now is in tables. So you have like 16 tables. So we added this table column, which is exactly the same as the MOP column now. Well, initially 6LoWPAN lived without it, and then there was 8025, which was mostly about creating that column. In our case, so it's an infrastructure thing. It does not really bring new function, it brings new infra. And we have a MOP draft, which is coming, MOPExt, which will bring new infra, but not new feature. And this new infra will be when the new MOPs will be introduced. They won't, because the problem is, if we did it in use of repo, or if we did it in this one, then it would not be balanced, kind of. And right now, we don't need them because we say it applies to all the MOPs that exist. So we could say we can leave for those two drafts, the way use of repo is already written and the way this one is already written, but we need to do what you say very soon in an infra draft, which is MOPEX maybe. That's just my suggestion.
Right. So, yes. So saying that it applies to all the MOPs that exist really says that it applies to all the MOPs, even the future ones that are not defined, right? Because again, right now, there's nothing that says that whatever bit has already been defined would not apply to some future thing. Because again, the registry is flat, right? It's just one column.
So do we need a
so
sentence, or we
if-
just leave it implied?
All I'm saying is that if somehow you really want to say that whatever bit has already been defined only applies to the MOPs that have been defined now,
Yes, we want to have that sentence.
when that infrastructure is defined, you need to go update that other old RFCs so that they don't apply to future MOPs, unless the future MOP wants to use that bit for whatever reason.
Which is what Raul will
So
be
there's
doing in
some
MOPEX.
more, text that has to go in there somehow.
So in our two drafts, we'll say applies to MOP blah blah blah, and for the rest we can't say. That's what we'll say, right? But we won't be doing IANA games. We'll just declare the bits to the IANA as if there is a single set of bits. And in MOPEX we say, oh, by the way, for future, like you say, it's different.
We create a new registry for the MOPX equals 7.
Right. When
MOP
MOPEX
equals
comes, it
7.
has a registry with a new column. It will add the column.
Yeah, sure, we could be column.
When we add the column, we
I-
describe this behavior.
I was just looking, because I actually, when you said this, I was like, really? I didn't think we actually had a registry for those bits. I thought we actually were just updating 6550 as an update. That's what I thought we were doing. And I just looked, and there is a registry, and we are updating it, and use of RPL's bits already in the list, even because it was allocated. It's by Anna when we went through them the first time. But I think what you're saying, Alvaro and Pascal, is that we will just go proceed and turn on, we'll allocate the bit as the use of RPL did, and that when we define MOP equals 7 in the MOPX draft, we will then add the column to that registry and create another thing. Because that puts it in the right draft, that creates the right place, and that will make it clear.
All
I hope.
good.
And not, we could walk down the hallway and talk to Michelle and find out what she thinks.
So we need one more quick edit to use of repo then, Alvaro, because before we hand it back to you.
Yeah. we will.
Sorry. Oh, it's a small change in use of repo to say, hey, it only applies to MOPS blah, right?
Yeah.
Rahul Jadhav, can we go for one more question in the same context? Not in the same context. With regards to the use of 8138, there is now we have a dependency of this on PDAO because we might have non-storing mode segments in projected DAO, and we would like the nodes to know that 8138 is on.
Okay. So you mean that when you send a PDAO, there should be a bit in the PDAO saying use 8138 for this project?
No, or rather not a bet. It is possible, but so basically the problem is this: in using PDAO, we can have a segments which are non-storing mode, which operates in non-storing mode, and they can essentially use 8138.
Or even in storing. I mean,
Even
if the whole network is not fully 8138 capable, it might be that a given path is. And so if you have the capabilities to know that this path is 8138 compliant, you could signal in the PDAO use compression for that path.
Right.
So it's not just non-store. I mean,
Yeah. So why?
So
Does that make any? So now we have to refer. I mean, would it mean that this document, there will be a normative reference in PDAO for this document?
not necessarily. So no, I don't think so. First thing is, by default, today, PDAO does what the DAG does. So if turn on as turned on, that's true for DAO, PDAO, everybody. So the DAG is doing it or the DAG is not doing it. And PDAO is just an overlay inside this big DAG. So for now, because we didn't specify anything, that's probably the way it works. It needs words in PDAO to just say that, but it would be the implicit way. Now, if we want to do something more fancy inside the PDAO sub-DAG, not just narrating from the underlay, but having its own capabilities, it's not because of this signaling anymore. It's because of a bit in the PDAO telling you, oh, by the way, you can compress even if the rest of the DAG does not. Do we want that? Well, you tell me on the mailing list. I hope, my thing is, that's why what you said earlier resonated to me is like, I really hope that in the near future, everybody does it and does not ask the question, which is what you said, the bit becomes useless. It's kind of the same thing for using 23, right? I mean, the bit becomes useless. Okay, if the bit is useless, then don't spend too much effort doing the PDAO different from the rest. Just think that everybody will use 8138 very soon, and we're all set. But yes, having a sentence in PDAO say the use of the compression is narrated from the DAG could be a sentence to add. So that would make PDAO refer to that normatively, if we say that.
Okay.
So this should fly.
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. So we are going to do the adoption call for this draft. So please, Ham, if you agree with this document.
The AC agrees. The AC hums more than they do, right? So please, Ham.
Please, Ham. Okay.
Raise hand.
No, so, yeah. Okay, now we raise hand because we didn't listen so much.
What?
Raise hand if you agree. Yeah.
Raise hand if you agree to adopt the document.
Yes.
I guess.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So raise hand if you don't agree with this document to be adopted. Yeah, if you oppose. Oh, if you oppose, thank you.
So nobody
No
disagrees?
hands. And
So you confirm on the mailing list, I guess.
yeah, and nobody in the Mitecon either. So yes, we confirm in the mailing list. So far, we agree to adopt this document. So thank you very much for the useful conversation. So we have some additional comments. No, additional comments or questions if the people has. No? So far we have to update this document and the use of Ripple info as well. Okay, so it's done for today. Thank you very much. We finished.
time now, or we have to-